It was a big reading. Thank you, Lisa. Paul throws a lot at us this morning. Maybe you tuned out of self-defense. It's an alarming text. It's an alarming text that is actually a baptismal text. Do you not know, Paul asked us, do you not know that all of us who were baptized into Christ's death? Well, no. Maybe we didn't know that. I think Paul's description this morning is kind of funny because it is so severe and serious, and it's about baptism. And as far as religious acts tend to go, baptism can be kind of low-hanging fruit. We might just get baptized because that's the expectation. It's the tradition. And the wonder of traditions is that you can do them without having to think about them. And sometimes this is how baptism is, like putting on your shoes in the morning. But did you know that when you put on your shoes, well, no, we don't want to think about that, Paul. We just want to put on our shoes or get baptized. I think about this because I hope that new people might come here because they have little babies and they want them baptized. And my hope is that when these people come, they won't ask me too many questions about baptism. I don't want to have to say to these people, why, yes, I would love to baptize that beautiful baby of yours and execute that child so that she dies to sin. I don't want to say that. It sounds so strange and weird, and I am very familiar with strange and weird approaches to baptism. My good Lutheran parents and my even better Lutheran grandparents trembled over the fate of any child who was not baptized. Back then, I think mothers would go to the hospital to have a baby and stay there for a couple months afterwards. And then the first Sunday that they would be home, these mothers would be back in church in the front pew, shushing their 4 other kids and getting ready to go forward for the sacrament of holy baptism. You couldn't risk it. You had to get baptized as soon as possible. In most traditions, or in a lot of traditions, it is only ordained clergy, like me, who are supposed to baptize people, except in extraordinary circumstances where death or danger is imminent. In those cases, any of you could baptize someone. And I think that this comes from a good place, but I sort of wonder if it reinforces this alarmist, fatalistic attitude towards anybody who's not baptized. We're okay with it unless there's something bad about to happen, and then we need anybody to do it because that child has to be baptized. I remember when Fred was born, Holly and I had no idea what we were doing. We went to the hospital. Holly worked so hard, delivered Fred. We stayed there for a couple of days, and then we got ready to check out and head home. We packed up all our things, but before we could leave the hospital, someone from the hospital had to come and inspect our car to make sure that the car seat had been put in properly. I had put the car seat in, and I was worried. But I didn't even really bristle at this dramatic overreach. I think I just thought the hospital staff were emissaries sent on behalf of my dead grandmother to make sure that my unbaptized child would be safe for the 1-mile ride home from the hospital. My mom or my grandma, I think they heard this text or read this text from Romans 6 all the time. They probably read it by candlelight, under the covers, with hot potatoes warming their feet. And I think they took it very seriously. And they thought everybody had to be baptized or else they were in mortal danger. That's too much. But on the other hand, there's a way in which baptism can just be treated like adiaphora. That's a fancy Greek word that pastors sometimes use to make you think they know more Greek than they actually do. Adiaphora just means indifferent. Take it or leave it. Who cares about baptism? We know it's not baptism that marks or saves a life. It's other things like a good education, a good job, a good family, good relationships, happiness, flourishing. These are the things that life is about, and we pursue them. And if we attain them, then it's okay to die once we're 100 years old or so. But we still have a lot of worrying to do. There's so much worrying to do. I think it starts at conception, and then it really takes off once you leave the hospital. You might be thinking about yourself or this child whom you have, how you've never loved someone more, and how this is the greatest blessing in the world, but now you need to spend the rest of your life thinking about them and worrying about them. What if something happens to them? What if they're not healthy? What if they're not smart? What if they're not hardworking? What if they don't find gainful employment? What if they're not kind? What if they don't get married? What if they don't want to have kids? What if they are not law-abiding? We can ask all these questions about ourselves or about our children or about life. And if we ask all these questions and we can't come up with an answer, it can seem as if this is not worth doing. We can't explain ourselves. So what are we doing? How do we keep going? Against the kingdoms of reason or careful planning or good argument, I think we are all searching for something that can affirm our existence, that can explain how we keep on pressing forward in spite of every risk that pervades this world. Cars that crush kids, cancer that catches us in the prime of life, stupid tragedy, a planet that is in peril. How do we keep going? What are we doing here? And when we ask these questions, and I think they are unavoidable questions, and they are alarming questions, when we ask these questions, I think that is finally when Paul's most odd and alarming language today meets us. Do you not know that all of us who were baptized into Christ's death? Paul says to us. Paul is proclaiming a death sentence upon all of us. Paul is telling us that we should look out upon the world and see death everywhere. Death in others, death in ourselves. But while we're doing this isn't the sort of death that ordinarily worries us or consumes us. Paul is saying that well prior to that death, we have already died to our worst fears, our worst fates. Paul is telling us about something else, this prior and precedent promise that God has made, this statement about all of us that expresses how from the very beginning we are held and loved, and how this amazing grace makes everything else that life is sort of an afterthought. There's a scene at the beginning of Luke's gospel. It's right after Jesus has been born, and Mary and Joseph bring Jesus to the temple, to church, for the first time. And Luke says that there is an old man who's been going to church his whole life, and his name is Simeon. And Simeon isn't sure why he's still going to church, because the sermons are dull, the choir is uninspired, the heat never works in the sanctuary in the winter, the coffee is weak, everybody is old, and after the service they talk to one another and can't understand what one another are saying. People see Simeon about town and they say, "Simeon, how was church?" And they're laughing at him because it's silly what he's doing. What are you doing, Simeon? But Luke says that Simeon keeps going to church or temple because Simeon is looking for consolation. He's looking to hear news that is good enough so that it will be safe to die. And that morning, Mary and Joseph walk in, and Simeon sees them holding the Christ child. And Simeon runs up to Jesus and holds him in his arms and says, "Now, Lord, you are dismissing your servant, for my eyes have seen your salvation. Now I am dismissed." Amen.